I didn't flinch when her fingers curled around my collar, tugging just hard enough to remind me where I stood. The china rattled slightly. My son didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at his tea like it might explain my presence. "Keep quiet or get out," she hissed, her smile still intact for the guests. So I smiled too. I passed the collard greens, folded my napkin, and the next morning I folded her name right out of my will. "Before we begin, may I ask, where in this big, beautiful world are you listening from? It's always a quiet honor to know who's sharing this space. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." The table gleamed under the chandelier, polished silver and heirloom china reflecting the golden light. Outside, the marsh grass bent with the late afternoon tide, the air drifting in through the open window with the faint smell of salt and pluff mud. Fran sat straight-backed at the far end of the dining table, a place she had claimed ever since Robert passed. Even without him, she held on to the ritual of Sunday dinners, food as a kind of glue for a family that was otherwise unraveling. She'd made shrimp and grits the way Robert liked it, heavy with butter, topped with scallions. Stephanie had brought a store-bought pecan pie, setting it down with the cool smile of someone who wanted credit without effort. Joel poured sweet tea, too sweet as always, humming off key. Marley had taken the seat beside Fran, sketchbook tucked discreetly under her chair. Conversation wandered. Weather, school assignments, office gossip. The polite kind of chatter that never leaves bruises. Fran let herself relax a little, hearing echoes of the old days when these meals felt warm instead of brittle. Then she leaned forward and told a story. "Joel," she said, her voice carrying a soft brightness, "do you remember the time you tried to camp out in the backyard? You made it until midnight before sneaking back in with mosquito bites and a face red as a tomato." Marley grinned, fork paused midair. "Dad, you did that?" Joel chuckled faintly. "Guess I did. I don't really remember the details." Fran smiled at her granddaughter instead. "He cried at the door until Robert carried him in, wrapped him in a quilt and gave him hot chocolate. The way he slurped it, he left a chocolate mustache for days." The story hung in the air like a firefly, brief, glowing, innocent. That's when Stephanie leaned sideways, her lips barely moving, her eyes locked on Fran's. Her whisper carried a blade's edge. "You need to stop talking. Just sit there and smile." Fran's breath caught. She heard the words, sharp enough to slice through the warmth in the room. For a moment she considered silence, considered letting it slip past her as she had a dozen times before. But something inside stiffened. The same spine that had carried her through widowhood and long nights alone. She lifted her chin. "And the funny thing," Fran continued, her tone unshaken, "was how he insisted he was brave enough to try again the next weekend. He never did, of course. Too many bug bites for one summer." Marley giggled. "That sounds like Dad." Fran's hand stayed steady on her napkin, but under the table her foot pressed hard against the floor. Stephanie's hand moved suddenly across the tablecloth, fingers sharp and fast. Before Fran could react, she felt the grip, nails grazing the skin beneath her blouse collar, fabric tugged tight against her throat. "Keep quiet or get out," Stephanie hissed. This time not even pretending to whisper. The room froze. The clatter of forks and glass stilled. The only sound was the distant hum of cicadas outside. Fran's eyes locked with hers, calm, searching, unwilling to flinch. Joel looked down at his plate, jaw tight, knuckles white against his glass, but no words leaving his mouth. He didn't move. Marley's sketchbook slid off her lap with a soft thud, pages fanning across the hardwood floor. Her small hand reached instinctively toward her grandmother, then pulled back, trembling. The air thickened, every second stretching longer than the last. Fran didn't fight the grip. She didn't shout. Instead, she breathed slow, a controlled calm that came from decades of swallowing storms. Her voice, when it finally came, was level, almost gentle. "Take your hand off me, Stephanie." The words floated over the table like smoke. And in the silence that followed, with Joel refusing to meet her gaze, with Marley frozen between fear and loyalty, Fran understood something she had never let herself admit before. She was utterly alone at her own table. Fran sat at her kitchen table long after the plates from dinner had been rinsed and stacked. The house felt too quiet. No clink of silverware, no chatter, no Robert humming under his breath the way he always had after supper. Only the low tick of the clock above the stove, steady and unbothered, as if nothing had cracked open inside her a few hours earlier. She rubbed her collarbone where Stephanie's fingers had dug in, skin tender from the pressure. Not bruised yet, but the phantom of that grip lingered. Her journals, stacked neatly in their row on the shelf, seemed to stare back at her, each leather spine whispering, "Enough." She picked up the phone before she could talk herself out of it. "Cliff?" Her voice was calmer than she felt. "Fran," came his steady baritone, warm with recognition but edged with concern. "I figured I'd hear from you soon. You ready to do this?" She closed her eyes, picturing the frozen silence around that dinner table. Joel's bent head, Marley's trembling hand, Stephanie's nails at her throat. "Yes," she said, steady this time. "Her name is still in my will. That ends today." Cliff didn't ask for explanations. He didn't need them. "Come by the office tomorrow morning. I'll block out the time myself." She almost thanked him too quickly, almost let relief leak through her voice, but caught herself. Grace first, then gratitude. "I'll be there," she said. After hanging up, Fran sat a long while, hands folded tight, as if praying. Only it wasn't prayer. It was resolve, hard, deliberate, unblinking. The next morning, Cliff's office smelled faintly of cedar polish and old paper, the kind of place where decisions carried weight. Fran took the chair across from his desk, the one she had sat in when she'd first drawn up her will after Robert's passing. She remembered how nervous she'd been back then, how final everything had felt. Now, finality was the point. Cliff slid a folder in front of her. "You want her removed from joint family access. That means no stake in the properties, no automatic entry to shared assets. That's the cleanest place to start." Fran nodded, lips pressed together. "She doesn't belong on any of it. She's already taken too much space in my house. She won't take 1 inch of it in my absence." Cliff's pen scratched against the paper. "Done." He kept his movements precise, respectful, no wasted gestures. He'd been Robert's friend as well as his attorney, and though he never said so outright, Fran knew he loathed bullies as much as she did. "What about the challenge clause?" he asked, looking up. Fran leaned forward, eyes sharp. "If she contests, she loses everything, every penny. For her, for Joel, for anyone who tries to stand with her." "That's enforceable," Cliff replied. His mouth twitched, half approval, half admiration. Not many people think to tighten it that way, but it will hold. The air between them felt different now, charged not with grief, but with purpose. Fran felt the knot in her chest loosen as he read the new language back to her. Iron words, she thought, stronger than any silence Stephanie could force on her. Cliff set his pen down, his gaze lingering on her. "Do you want to add a new beneficiary?" Fran's hand smoothed the table's edge, fingertips brushing the grain. She thought of Marley's wide eyes at the recital, her whispered, "I won't forget you." She thought of Joel's silence, how it had weighed more than words. Her throat tightened, but her answer was steady. "Yes," Fran said. "There's someone worth remembering." Cliff didn't press. He only nodded, writing a note at the bottom of the file. "Then let's make it official." Fran reached for the pen he offered, fingers brushing its cool barrel. Her reflection stared back at her from the brass lamp on his desk. A woman aged, yes, but not broken. She signed with a flourish she hadn't felt in years. The ink dried quickly, final as a closing door. She set the pen down and looked up, her eyes clear. "Stephanie thinks she silenced me," Fran said quietly. "She has no idea I've only just begun." The school bus hissed to a stop at the corner, and Marley climbed down with her backpack slung low, shoulders tense as if the day had been too heavy for a 13-year-old to carry. Fran watched from the porch rocker, a glass of iced tea sweating in her hand. She could tell by the girl's careful steps on the gravel drive that something was on her mind. Marley didn't bother with hello. She pushed through the screen door and dropped her backpack with a thud by the wall. "Grandma," she whispered, eyes darting toward the window as if the live oaks outside might have ears. "Are you okay? Mom been tense the other night." Fran's throat tightened, but she smoothed it over with a calm smile. She rose from the rocker and held out a hand. "Come on, sugar. Let's do something with our hands. Talking's easier when we're painting." They settled on the back porch where sunlight slanted through the slats, turning the air golden. Fran set out brushes, a row of chipped seashells she'd collected years ago, and 2 mason jars filled with water. The salt smell drifted in from the marsh, mingling with the tang of acrylic paint. Marley dipped a brush into blue and began tracing lines over a scallop shell, quiet at first, then blurting, "I don't like how she talks to you. It's not fair." Fran steadied her own brush, painting slow strokes of white across a conch shell. She kept her tone even. "Some people forget how to be kind. Doesn't mean we have to forget who we are." Marley's small hand twitched, a streak of blue dripping across the porch rail. She bit her lip hard, then whispered, "Well, I won't forget you, ever." Fran's chest ached at the words, so fierce, so certain from someone so young. She reached out, covering Marley's paint-speckled fingers with her own. Their hands fit together like pieces of a puzzle, warm and steady. For a moment, the air didn't smell of salt and paint, but of possibility. Inside, Fran's journals waited. One in particular, the leather-bound one Robert had given her on their 40th anniversary, sat open on her writing desk, half filled with letters to Marley. She had started them years ago, recording little truths, the recipes Joel never learned, the way Robert once patched the roof in a thunderstorm, the family stories no one else cared to keep alive. That night, after Marley had gone upstairs to wash her hands, Fran pulled the journal closer and uncapped her fountain pen. On a fresh page she wrote slowly, careful to shape each word. "For when you're old enough to understand, remember this. Strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it looks like walking away with your head high. Sometimes it's knowing who not to become." She paused, hearing Marley humming faintly from the bathroom, and added one more line. "And no matter what happens, you were the one who still held my hand." Fran tucked the journal back into the lockbox beneath her bed, labeled Truth. She closed the lid firmly, sliding the key onto a chain she wore under her blouse. The next morning, she met Cliff again. His office smelled of the same cedar polish, but the air felt less heavy now, charged with purpose instead of grief. He pushed a new draft across the desk. "Educational trust," he explained. "Private, sealed. Covers her schooling through college, and then some. No one can touch it, not even Joel." Fran traced the edge of the paper, eyes burning. "Thank you, Cliff." "You're protecting her future," he said simply. "That's more than most people ever manage." Fran signed without hesitation, the ink flowing strong, her name anchoring the page like a promise. As she slid the pen back, she thought of Marley's paint-streaked hand in hers, the certainty in that small voice. "I won't forget you," Fran whispered under her breath, meant for no one but herself. "Neither will I." Fran was shelling butter beans on the porch when she heard his car. Joel's pickup, the same one Robert had helped him buy fresh out of college, pulled into the gravel drive with a crunch that felt heavier than the sound should have been. The cicadas quieted as if they, too, were listening. He stepped out in khakis and a wrinkled polo, carrying none of the ease he usually wore like a second skin. His smile was thin, forced, like a bandage barely clinging to skin after a storm. "Mom," he said, climbing the steps 2 at a time. "Can we talk?" Fran didn't answer right away. She finished dropping the beans into the bowl, the soft plink of them hitting porcelain the only sound between them. Then she set the bowl aside and folded her hands in her lap, gaze steady. "If you've come to defend her, save your breath," Joel sighed, rubbing the back of his neck like a boy caught in a lie. I came to say I'm sorry. About the other night. She was out of line. Fran tilted her head, studying him. Out of line? Her voice was quiet but sharp enough to make him shift his weight. She laid hands on me, Joel, at my table, and you stood there. Joel flinched, then tried to shrug it off, hands splayed helplessly. It wasn't that serious, Mom. You're making it sound worse than it was. She lost her temper. People do. Fran's breath left her in a slow, controlled exhale. Not in this house. Not at me. And not with my son watching like a stranger too scared to raise his eyes. His face colored, but he pressed on. I'm trying to keep peace here. You're tearing the family apart with all this will stuff, and whatever else you're doing behind closed doors. Her laugh came sharp, humorless. Peace? Is that what you call silence while your wife drags your mother by the collar? If that's your peace, Joel, I'll burn it to the ground myself. Mom? No, she cut him off, voice steel now. Listen carefully. When you told me it wasn't serious, that was the last sentence you will ever speak over my legacy. You don't get to decide how much my dignity is worth. Not anymore. The air thickened between them, charged and brittle. Joel paced the porch, shoulders rising and falling with ragged breaths. Do you hear yourself? You sound like you want a war. I'm begging you, don't do this. Don't split us apart. Fran rose slowly, standing eye to eye with him, though her frame was smaller, older. Her gaze didn't waver. I'm not splitting anything, Joel. I'm putting it back together without the rot. If that means the structure looks different when I'm finished, then so be it. Joel's jaw clenched, his fist curling against his thighs. You're choosing sides, Mom. You're choosing her over me. Fran shook her head once, deliberate. No, Joel. You chose her over yourself the moment you stopped standing. All I'm doing is recognizing it. The cicadas picked up again, their song filling the silence that fell after her words. Joel opened his mouth to speak but closed it again, lips working soundlessly, like a man drowning too far from shore. Finally he muttered, "You're going to regret this," and turned for the steps. Fran didn't stop him. She watched his back as he crossed the drive. Every step louder than the last. Gravel spit beneath his tires when he peeled away, dust rising like smoke behind him. She lowered herself back into the rocker, picking up a bean pod, but not breaking it open. Her hands trembled faintly, but her eyes stayed dry. Inside, the lockbox under her bed waited. Inside that lockbox, her truth was already safer than her son's loyalty had ever been. Still, as the sound of Joel's truck faded down the road, a darker thought crept in. Uninvited but insistent. If Joel couldn't defend her now, what would he be willing to do once he realized what she had already taken from him? The morning air was brittle with the smell of tidewater and wet earth as Fran pulled her cardigan tighter and stepped into Cliff's office. This time there was no tremor in her hand, no flutter of hesitation in her chest. She carried herself as though each step were carved from stone. Cliff rose from his chair, his usual steady calm evident, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, respect. He didn't ask how she was. He simply slid a leather-bound folder across the desk, the weight of it deliberate. Everything's here, he said. Clean, airtight, ironclad. Fran sat, smoothing the hem of her cardigan as though to press down the storm inside her. She opened the folder, eyes scanning line after line. Her son's name was still there, tied like ivy around Stephanie's, but now she saw the clean black lines slashed across Stephanie's. Not erased, not hidden, struck, as final as a gravestone chiseled and sealed. Property access, Cliff explained, tapping the page. Gone. Shared accounts, closed to her, vehicles, holdings, the beach house, all of it stripped. Fran nodded once. A small, precise movement. He turned another page, his tone quieter now. Healthcare proxies. Previously split between Joel and Stephanie. That's been revoked. Neither of them holds a finger on your medical care now. That authority falls to the executor you choose. Fran let her hand rest against the paper. feeling the truth of it under her palm. No one who stood silent while I was humiliated should ever be allowed to speak for me again. Cliff's mouth tightened. Then it's done. Her pen waited at the top corner of the document, a sleek black instrument that caught the morning light. Fran picked it up, the weight of it balanced in her hand. She thought of Joel's face on the porch, his muttered threat, "You're going to regret this." And then she thought of Marley's paint-smeared fingers curling around hers. With a steady breath, she signed. Flourish, initials, final mark. A sweep of ink, black and permanent, cutting Stephanie out of her legacy the way a surgeon removes a tumor. When she finished, she set the pen down and leaned back, a smile curling faintly at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't gloating, it was relief, release. A woman reclaiming her ground, paper by paper, line by line. Done, Cliff said again, his voice firmer this time, as though stamping the word into the room itself. He gathered the documents and sealed them in a fresh envelope. No court can undo this. No contest without total forfeiture. It's as ironclad as law allows. Fran let out a soft, satisfied breath. Good. Then let them pound their fists against the door. They'll find it locked. A knock broke the silence. Fran glanced toward the doorway, startled for half a beat, but then softened at the familiar rasp of a voice. "Hope I'm not interrupting important law business," Inez drawled, her accent sharp as the scent of lemon pie wafting in from the box she carried. Cliff chuckled under his breath, but Fran rose, meeting her friend halfway. The two women embraced briefly, firm and unshaken. Inez set the box down on the desk and lifted the lid. "Brought you pie. But by the look on your face, I think you've already had your dessert. Did you kill her softly?" Fran's smile deepened. "Not softly," she said, eyes glinting. "But legally." Inez barked a laugh that startled even Cliff, who rarely broke composure. "That's better than softly, sweetheart. That lasts." The three of them sat together, pie plates in hand, as the envelope lay on the desk between them, a quiet bomb, waiting to detonate the moment Stephanie realized she'd been cut out of everything she'd ever expected to inherit. Fran forked a bite of pie, savoring the citrus bite, and thought not of bitterness, but of clarity. The kind Robert had prized in her. The kind Marley deserved to inherit. But just as she lifted her glass of water, Cliff's phone buzzed sharply on the desk. He frowned, picked it up, and read the screen. His brow furrowed. Fran set her fork down. "What is it?" Cliff hesitated, then slid the phone across the desk for her to see. An email from an unfamiliar address. Subject line: Interference notice. Unauthorized inquiry into estate files. The Whitlow house was quiet when the courier dropped the thick envelope on the marble entry table. Stephanie tore it open with manicured nails, the jagged rip echoing louder than it should have in the stillness. She skimmed the first page, her face tightening, then the second, her jawline whitening with every line she read. By the time she reached the clause about contestation and forfeiture, her hands were shaking. Joel appeared behind her, beer bottle dangling from his fingers. "What's that?" She didn't answer, not at first. She shoved the papers at him with a snap, pacing the hardwood like a caged animal. Joel scanned, lips moving over the legal language. His brow furrowed deeper, and when he finally looked up, his voice was flat. "It's real." Stephanie spun on him. "She can't do this." The words tore out of her throat, half scream, half plea. "Do you understand? She cannot just erase me like I'm nothing." Joel set the packet down carefully, as though it might explode. "It says she can." Stephanie's laugh came wild, brittle. No, she's bluffing. She's old, Joel, old and bitter. This won't hold up." But her eyes betrayed her. They darted back to the signature, that looping, steady name anchoring the bottom of the page like stone in water. Fran had signed without tremor. No bluff. Stephanie snatched her phone, stabbing at the screen. The shrill ring filled Fran's kitchen miles away, where she was making tea. She glanced at the caller ID, Joel. Her hand hovered for a moment, Then she pressed decline. The phone went silent, then buzzed again. Again she declined. Fran set the phone face down on the counter. Her kettle began to whistle. Moments later, her laptop pinged. An email from Cliff. Attempted interference flagged. Files accessed without authorization. We're tightening firewalls. Fran stared at the screen, lips curving faintly, not fear, not triumph. Something colder, steadier. They were scrambling already, clawing at the edges of a wall she'd bricked in iron. The screen door creaked open and Inez stepped in, wind in her silver hair. She dropped a bag of groceries on the counter, sharp eyes flicking to the phone. "That boy's been lighting up your line, hasn't he?" Fran poured steaming water over the tea bag, the rich scent of chamomile rising. "He has." "You gonna answer?" Fran stirred the tea, slow and unhurried. "No." Inez leaned a hip against the counter, crossing her arms. "Good. Let her scream into a void. You've got wind chimes now." Fran glanced out the window at the porch, where the brass chimes swayed gently in the evening breeze, their tones soft, harmonious. The sound was a balm, threading through her chest in a way no apology from Joel ever could. But even as she listened, she couldn't shake the thought of Stephanie's face when she really realized, that Fran hadn't just threatened her place. She had erased it. Clean, permanent, legal. The tea steeped darker, steam curling like smoke, and Fran thought of the storm gathering on the other side of her silence. She took her first sip. Calm, cool, certain. But the chimes tinkled louder as the wind rose outside, and she knew storms didn't stay outside forever. Fran parked 3 blocks from the middle school, choosing to walk the tree-lined streets, rather than fight for a space near the auditorium. The live oaks arched overhead, dripping with Spanish moss, their shadows long in the late afternoon sun. She clutched a small bouquet of gardenias, their fragrance strong against the salt air drifting up from the harbor. Inside the auditorium, parents shuffled with programs in hand, voices hushed but buzzing. Fran slipped into the lobby early, scanning the rows of seats before they filled. She chose one near the center aisle, not too close to the front, but close enough to see Marley's expression when she sang. She had just set her purse down when she noticed the movement. Joel and Stephanie entered together, whispering to a staff volunteer in a crisp navy vest. Joel's eyes flickered toward her, then away. Stephanie leaned in close to the woman, her lips thin and sharp as she gestured discreetly toward Fran's row. The volunteer hesitated, then crossed the aisle toward her. "Ma'am," she began softly, "I'm sorry, but these seats are reserved for parents. We'll need you to sit further back." Fran felt the flush of eyes on her, other parents pretending not to watch, their ears tilted toward the quiet confrontation. She folded the program in her lap, smoothed her cardigan, and rose without protest. "Of course," she said evenly. "Thank you for letting me know." Her voice carried no tremor, no bitterness. She walked the length of the aisle with her head high, the gardenias steady in her hand. She took a seat near the back, the kind that caught more shadows than spotlight. When the recital began, rows of children filed onto the stage in neat uniforms, the bright notes of piano filling the air. Fran clapped with the rest, her smile gentle, her eyes fixed on the second row where Marley stood. The girl's gaze scanned the crowd, searching, and when it landed on Fran in the back, her lips pressed into a thin line. After the first number, while the stage lights shifted, Fran felt a tug at her sleeve. She turned to see Marley, still in costume, having slipped from the side curtain, her face flushed with the daring of it. "I saw where they made you sit," she whispered, breathless. Fran's throat tightened. She touched her granddaughter's cheek lightly, careful not to smear the stage makeup. "It's all right, sugar. I'm here. That's what matters." But Marley shook her head, eyes fierce in the dim light. "It's not all right. After the last song, I want you to come up. Stand with me, please." Fran's heart clenched, torn between caution and the fierce love that swelled at the request. She nodded, just once. "If you want me there, I'll come." Marley squeezed her hand quickly before darting back toward the wings. Fran's fingers lingered on the space where her granddaughter's warmth had been. The recital wound through choral pieces and duets, voices soaring through the auditorium. Fran clapped for each, steady and proud, though her vision blurred with unshed tears. Not from sadness, something deeper, a bittersweet ache, the recognition of being seen by the one person who mattered most. When the final number came, the children sang with a fullness that made the rafters hum. Fran's palms stung from clapping, her chest tight with emotion. She stood with the others, applauding through tears, her gardenias still resting carefully on her lap. And as the lights dimmed and the applause swelled, Fran saw Marley glance toward the back, her chin lifting in quiet defiance. A child inviting her grandmother into the space others tried to push her out of. Fran's tears finally fell, silent but certain. The gymnasium smelled faintly of floor wax and paper programs as families funneled into the lobby, chattering and clapping each other on the back. Fran lingered near the corner, gardenias cradled in her arm, waiting for the swell of parents to thin. Marley came bounding through the crowd, her cheeks flushed pink from the stage lights, still wearing her choir robe. She spotted Fran and darted into her arms, nearly toppling the bouquet. Fran held her tight, breathing in the faint powder of stage makeup and the salt of sweat. "You sang beautifully, sugar," Fran whispered into her granddaughter's hair. Marley pulled back, eyes bright. "You came, just like you said." Fran smiled, smoothing a stray curl off the girl's forehead. "I always will." From across the lobby, Fran caught the sight of Stephanie's stiff posture, Joel's hand hovering near her elbow like a man holding onto lightning. They were talking with other parents, smiling with the varnished ease they reserve for public settings. But Fran saw the way Stephanie's eyes flicked, sharp and watching, tracking every move. Fran lowered her voice. "Come outside for a moment. I have something for you." They slipped out the side door into the cooling evening. The parking lot buzzed with headlights and car doors slamming, but the live oaks along the sidewalk gave them cover. Fran reached into her purse and drew out a small, time-worn leather box, its edges softened by years of handling. "This was my mother's," she said, pressing it into Marley's palms. Marley's eyes widened. She opened the box with careful fingers. Inside, nestled against faded velvet, lay a delicate gold necklace with a tiny locket, worn but gleaming. Beneath it rested a folded slip of paper, Fran's neat handwriting visible through the creases. Marley touched the necklace like it might vanish. "It's beautiful." Fran's throat tightened. "It belongs to the one who remembered me." The girl blinked, her lip quivering, and tucked herself against Fran's side. "I'll never forget you, Grandma." Fran kissed the crown of her head, holding the moment as long as she dared. A sharp click of heels echoed behind them. Stephanie's voice sliced the quiet. "What's this?" Marley startled, clutching the box protectively to her chest. Stephanie's eyes fixed on the necklace, her face tightening as if she'd swallowed something sour. Fran straightened, her voice smooth as silk. "Just a gift. Some things don't come with receipts," she said, meeting Stephanie's glare without flinching. "Just recognition." Stephanie's nostrils flared, but Joel appeared in the doorway behind her, tugging her gently by the arm. "Let's go," he muttered, voice weary. Stephanie didn't move right away. Her gaze burned into Fran's like an unspoken threat. But Marley's arms wrapped around the box. And for once, Stephanie turned away first, her heels snapping against the concrete as Joel guided her toward the car. Fran watched them go, her face calm but her pulse racing. She knew this wasn't the end. It was the opening note of another storm. The next morning, she sat across from Cliff again. He placed a new set of papers on the desk, his tone brisk but approving. Trust protections finalized. Educational support, creative grant extension. No one touches it without your approval. Fran smoothed the edge of the document, thinking of Marley's wide eyes as she held the necklace. "She'll have a future no one can steal." Cliff leaned back, his eyes steady on hers. "You've given her more than money. You've given her truth. And that's harder to take than any inheritance. Fran signed, the pen scratching steady and certain. She thought of Stephanie's face stiffening, Joel's silence heavy as stone, and Marley's hands clutching that little box like a lifeline. Fran allowed herself a rare smile. A grandmother's promise now written in ink, protected by law. The Charleston County Courthouse loomed pale against the morning sky, its columns catching the weak sun like watchful sentinels. Fran climbed the steps beside Cliff, her hands steady on the rail. She hadn't set foot in this building since Robert's probate years ago, when grief weighed her shoulders down. Today there was no grief, only clarity sharpened to steel. Cliff held the door for her. "We're prepared," he said simply, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who rarely lost. Inside, the air was cool, the faint scent of lemon polish and paper rising from the marble floors. The courtroom itself buzzed with low voices as lawyers adjusted files, clerks shuffled papers, and the judge took her seat with the heavy bang of the gavel. Fran saw them then, Joel and Stephanie. They sat together at the plaintiff's table, Joel in an ill-fitting suit that hung wrong on his shoulders, Stephanie in a blazer sharp enough to cut, her chin lifted as if daring the world to deny her. But Fran noticed the tightness around her eyes, the way her fingers tapped the table too quickly. Their attorney rose first, a young man with slick hair and nervous sweat darkening his collar. His voice cracked as he launched into his opening. "Your Honor, we are here today because Mrs. Whitlow's recent will revisions were made under duress, influenced by manipulative third parties. My clients simply want fairness restored." The judge's eyebrows arched. "Duress?" The lawyer shuffled his papers, stammering. "Yes, ma'am. The defendant is, well, she's 71, vulnerable, easily misled." Fran's lips pressed together in the faintest hint of amusement. Across the table, Cliff's expression didn't flicker. When the judge gave him the nod, he stood with his file in hand, movements measured, deliberate. "With respect," he said, his voice cutting clean through the room, "there is no duress. What we have here is a woman who exercised her legal rights with precision and foresight. Every document notarized, every clause airtight. The plaintiffs are grasping at air." He slid a folder toward the clerk, pages neatly tabbed, signatures bold. "We have proof of intent, independent witnesses, and digital timestamps of every revision. If anything, what's been attempted here is interference by the very people claiming unfairness." The judge flipped through a few pages, her frown deepening. Stephanie leaned forward, whispering furiously to her lawyer. The man swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing like he'd been handed a script in a language he didn't know. The judge looked up. "Do the plaintiffs have any evidence that Mrs. Whitlow was coerced?" Stephanie's lawyer stammered. "Well, not direct evidence, Your Honor, but we believe—" "That's enough," the judge cut in, tone firm. She turned toward Fran. "Mrs. Whitlow, do you wish to speak?" Fran rose slowly, her cardigan brushing her skirt, the silence thick as she stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was calm as tidewater, but sharp beneath. "I remember every word she said," Fran told the room, eyes locking on Stephanie without flinching, "including the ones she whispered." The air shifted, whispers rippling through the benches. Joel stared down at the table, his knuckles white around a pen he never once lifted to write. Stephanie's face blanched, then flushed red. "She's lying!" she burst out, rising half from her chair. But the judge's gavel cracked, sharp enough to silence the outburst. "Sit down, Mrs. Whitlow," the judge said firmly, not to Fran, but to Stephanie. "This court finds no grounds to contest the will. All revisions stand." The words landed like a stone in water, final, unyielding. The judge added, almost as an afterthought, "And the plaintiff's frivolous filing wastes this court's time. A fine will be levied." Stephanie's mouth fell open, her lawyer sinking lower in his seat. Joel remained frozen, eyes on the grain of the wooden table, as though it might swallow him whole. Fran exhaled slowly, her hands steady at her sides. She hadn't shouted, hadn't argued. She hadn't needed to. The truth had spoken without raising its voice. She turned toward the aisle, gardenias waiting back in her car, her stride quiet but firm. Cliff fell in beside her, papers tucked neatly under his arm. Behind them, Stephanie hissed something low and sharp into Joel's ear, her nails gripping his sleeve. Joel didn't look up, didn't look at Fran, didn't look at anyone. Fran pushed open the heavy courthouse door, sunlight spilling across her face. But even as the light warmed her skin, she felt it, the shift in the air, the tension humming like a wire pulled too tight. Fran heard the screen door creak long before the footsteps reached the kitchen. She was trimming fat from a chicken breast when Marley appeared, her backpack slung low, her shoulders heavier than they ought to be at 13. The girl set the bag down and leaned against the counter, eyes steady, unflinching. "They don't see me," she said, voice low but firm. "But I see you." Fran set the knife down carefully, as if the words themselves required reverence. She wiped her hands on a dish towel, turned and cupped Marley's cheek. "You can't stay forever, sugar," she murmured. "But you can stay safe here." Marley's jaw trembled, her eyes bright. When I'm with you, it feels like I matter. Like someone actually sees me, not just what they want me to be." Fran pulled her close, wrapping her arms around the girl's thin shoulders. The kitchen smelled of garlic and onions, the soft simmer of red rice filling the air. She breathed in the comfort of the moment, anchoring herself in it. "Come help me," Fran said gently. "Busy hands make steadier hearts." Together they worked side by side. Fran showed her how to season the chicken, how to stir the pot without letting the rice stick. She poured sweet tea over clinking ice, the glass sweating in her hand, and Marley carried it to the table with quiet pride. For a while, the kitchen was alive with the small rhythm of domestic sounds, the scrape of a spoon, the oven door shutting, the hum of the ceiling fan overhead. When dinner was ready, they sat together at the wooden table, the same one where Robert had once carved initials into the underside during a restless evening of storytelling. The meal spread before them was simple but rich. Roast chicken, red rice, collard greens, and the golden glow of iced tea catching the light. Marley ate slowly, her gaze never far from her grandmother. "Grandma, what was it like? Before all this, before Dad, before me?" Fran's fork stilled against her plate. She considered the question carefully. So many stories, so many versions of the past. The ones Joel remembered, the ones Stephanie twisted, the ones Robert used to tell over Sunday dinners. But only one truth, and it had lived too long in silence. She rose, walked to her bedroom, and returned with the lockbox marked Truth. She set it on the table between them, the metal cool and solid. From inside, she drew the journal, the leather-bound one Robert had given her, its edges softened from years of handling. She placed it in Marley's hands. "Your parents built a story," Fran said softly. "But here's the truth." Marley ran her fingers over the cover, reverent, as if it were a relic. She opened the first page and saw her grandmother's looping handwriting, letters leaning slightly like old friends leaning against one another. Her lips moved as she read the first line aloud. "When you're old enough to understand, know this. Strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers and still carries the weight of thunder." Marley looked up, eyes shining. "This is for me?" Fran nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She reached across the table and took Marley's hand, their fingers lacing together over the journal. The clock ticked steadily in the background, the tea sweating circles on the wood, the smell of roast chicken still warm in the air. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of trust, of recognition, of something neither Joel nor Stephanie could ever erase. For the first time in years, Fran felt the fragile but unshakable weight of legacy, not as money or property, but as memory preserved, truth written down, and love made permanent in ink. Marley held the journal against her chest. "I want to know it all." Fran smiled softly, but in her chest, something darker stirred. Because she knew once Marley opened those pages, There would be no turning back. The knock at the screen door was sharp, impatient. Fran wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened it to find Joel standing there, his jaw tight, his tie crooked as if he'd yanked it on in anger rather than care. "She's coming home with me," he said without greeting, his voice carrying more command than conviction. Fran didn't flinch. "Who?" she asked evenly, though she already knew. Joel's eyes darted past her shoulder toward the living room, where Marley sat cross-legged on the rug, journal open in her lap, her lips moving as she read. "My daughter," he snapped. "She doesn't belong here. She belongs with us." Before Fran could answer, Marley rose and stepped into the doorway, her spine straight, though her hands trembled against the journal. "No, Dad," she said firmly. "I'm visiting. I'm not living here, but I'm staying tonight. With Grandma." The silence that followed cracked like thunder. Joel's mouth opened, but no words came. He blinked hard, as though he'd been struck. Fran placed a steadying hand on Marley's shoulder and looked Joel square in the eyes. "You stood by when she grabbed me," she said, her voice low, each word sharpened by memory. "You'll stand by now while she heals here." Joel's face mottled red. He glanced at Marley, then at Fran, then back again, his chest rising and falling too quickly. For a moment, the boy she once raised, the one who cried over mosquito bites and cocoa mustaches, seemed to flicker through, but it vanished under the weight of silence. This isn't," he stammered, his throat working, his fist clenching. Finally, he tore his eyes away, unable to hold their gaze. Without another word, he turned, stormed down the steps, and slammed his truck door so hard the window rattled. Gravel spat from the tires as he peeled out of the drive. Fran exhaled slowly, pulling Marley closer against her side. The girl didn't cry, but her grip on the journal tightened until her knuckles whitened. Later that evening, Fran sat across from Cliff in his office once more. He'd already heard about Joel's outburst. Word traveled fast in Charleston's close-knit circles. He adjusted his glasses and laid a fresh set of documents on the desk. "I've increased the security provisions on Marley's trust," he said. His tone clipped with focus. "Her assets can't be accessed, monitored, or interfered with by anyone but you until she reaches legal age. Not Joel, not Stephanie, not through back channels." Fran nodded, her relief subtle but real. She deserves peace, even if her parents can't give it to her. Cliff leaned forward, his eyes steady. "You've already given her more than that. You've given her the truth." Fran thought of Marley's voice at the door, clear and unwavering. "I'm visiting. I'm staying tonight." The kind of courage it took at 13 to face her own father down. It made Fran's chest ache with pride, and with a flicker of sorrow for the boy Joel used to be, the one she could no longer find. When Fran returned home, Inez was waiting at the kitchen table with a pot of coffee and Harriet, an old friend from church who had always spoken her mind without apology. Harriet's eyes narrowed as Fran recounted the confrontation. "That boy," Harriet said finally, setting her mug down with a thud, "isn't a son anymore. He's an echo, hollow where a man should stand." The words cut, but Fran didn't argue. She stared at the chimes swaying outside the porch, their song carrying faintly through the open window. Joel had once been her proudest melody. Now he was only noise, fading into the distance. Marley padded into the kitchen, clutching the journal against her chest. She looked at Fran, then at the two women at the table. "Can I read aloud tonight? Just a little." Fran reached out her hand. "Of course, sugar. Read us the truth." Fran sat across from Cliff once again, the courthouse papers stacked neatly between them. The late afternoon light slanted through the blinds, striping the desk with bands of gold. "This is the final step," Cliff said, sliding a set of documents toward her. His tone was steady, matter-of-fact. "A no-contact order. It bars them from discussing your estate in any legal capacity, now or in the future." Fran lifted her pen without hesitation. The words blurred only slightly in her vision. Not from doubt, but from the sheer weight of the years that had led her here. She signed, each stroke sharp and unwavering. Cliff collected the papers. With this, Stephanie and Joel have no legal footing left. You've closed every door. Fran allowed herself a slow breath. Good. They'll find me gone before they ever find me weak. That evening, at her kitchen table, Fran opened her laptop. The glow of the screen washed her face pale as she typed into the community bulletin board, a corner of the internet where neighbors shared recipes, church events, and lost dog sightings. Her post was short, plain, and unadorned. I am not dead, just done. Done with being silenced. Done with being handled. Done with being told to sit quietly while others write my ending for me. I have written it myself, and it is mine to keep. She hit publish and closed the laptop, the soft click louder in the silence than she expected. By morning, the porch was covered in offerings, casseroles wrapped in foil, vases of flowers, notes tucked into envelopes. People she hadn't spoken to in years came by, leaving behind gestures of quiet solidarity. A neighbor dropped off chicken salad. Someone from church brought pound cake. Even the mailman paused to say, "Good for you, Mrs. Whitlow. Good for you." Fran thanked them all with her usual grace, though each kindness pressed against something tender inside her. Marlee, meanwhile, had found her own voice. That night she posted a tribute on her school's message board. The words were simple, typed in the unsteady rhythm of a 13-year-old still learning her cadence, but they rang with truth. My grandma taught me truth without yelling. That's harder than it looks. I hope one day I'm that strong. The post spread further than either of them expected. By the weekend, a reporter from the local paper knocked on Fran's door. A young woman with a notepad and wide, earnest eyes. She asked if Fran would be willing to give an interview for an elder rights column. Fran hesitated, but only briefly. Then she invited her in, poured sweet tea into tall glasses, and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where battles had been fought in silence, and now, finally, won in words. I don't want to be seen as a victim, Fran said as the reporter clicked her pen. I want to be seen as someone who chose not to be erased. The reporter nodded, scribbling furiously. What do you want people to take from your story? Fran folded her hands, eyes sharp and calm. That silence is not peace, that it is not weakness to stand alone at your own table, so long as you stand. When the piece was published 2 days later, her words were quoted in bold at the top of the page. Neighbors stopped her in the grocery store to thank her. The church choir director shook her hand after service. Even the pharmacist slipped her a smile when she picked up her prescriptions. Fran had not expected the wave of support, and though it warmed her, it also unsettled her. Because she knew every word written, every casserole left, every pat on the back, it all fanned the flames of the storm that Stephanie was nursing behind closed doors. The invitation had come weeks earlier, printed on thick ivory cardstock with a gold seal, the Charleston Elder Advocacy Award Gala. Fran had tucked it between the pages of her journal, unsure if she'd ever attend. But when the day arrived, Marlee pressed the dress she'd chosen for her and set the shoes by the door, eyes bright with insistence. So Fran went. The hall was lit with chandeliers, crystal-catching light that shimmered across linen-draped tables. Men in tailored suits and women in pearls mingled with laughter that rose like champagne fizz. Fran sat near the stage, her hands folded, her breath measured. She was not here for spectacle. She was here for testimony. When her name was called, the applause began politely, then swelled into something warmer. Fran stood, her blue dress catching the glow of the lights, and walked toward the podium with a grace that felt borrowed from Robert's steady arm, from Inez's stubborn faith, from Marlee's unshaken hand. The plaque was placed in her arms, weighty, polished, for advocacy, resilience, and courage in elder rights. The applause quieted as she adjusted the microphone. She cleared her throat, her voice calm but strong. My speech is titled, "Silence is Not Peace." The room stilled. Forks paused over plates, every face tilted toward her. I have lived 71 years, she began, And in those years, I learned that silence wears many disguises. People call it grace. They call it patience. Sometimes they even call it love. But silence in the face of cruelty is not peace. It is surrender. And surrender, left too long, eats away at the soul. Her eyes moved slowly over the crowd. When I was told to keep quiet, I chose instead to write. When I was told to smile, I chose instead to sign my name to the truth. I did not raise my voice because I did not need to. Truth doesn't shout. It simply stands. A ripple passed through the audience, murmurs, then nods, then the unmistakable sound of muffled weeping. A woman dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. A man gripped his wife's hand. Fran's gaze found Marley in the front row, sitting tall, the journal resting in her lap like a sacred text. Beside her sat Inez, chin high, eyes brimming, and at the back of the hall, half in shadow, Joel. His arms crossed, his face unreadable, but his presence heavy as stone. Fran drew a breath and finished. I stand here not as someone who won a fight, but as someone who refused to disappear. And I stand with every person who has ever been told they are too old, too quiet, or too small to matter. You do matter. And silence will never be peace. For a moment there was no sound at all. Then the applause erupted, rising in waves, building until the entire hall stood. A standing ovation that shook the chandeliers and filled the air with something larger than victory. Fran bowed her head once, accepting the honor not as triumph, but as recognition. When she stepped down from the stage, Marley leapt to her feet and wrapped her arms around her waist. "You were amazing, Grandma," she whispered, tears dampening her cheek. Backstage, Inez hugged her tight, her laugh shaky. "Lord Fran, you could have bottled that speech and sold it by the gallon. You had the whole room crying." Cliff appeared, slipping the plaque from Fran's trembling hands and holding it like a shield. "You rewrote everything," he said quietly, pride shining in his eyes. "And you did it without yelling once." Fran smiled, her chest swelling with something fierce and quiet. For the first time in years, she felt not erased, not diminished, but seen. But as she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse through the curtains. Joel was still there in the back row, motionless, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity she hadn't felt since he was a boy begging for her approval. Only now it was different, darker, unreadable. Fran's steps faltered. The ovation still echoed in her ears, but the look in her son's eyes clung heavier than any applause. The pen hovered in Fran's hand, the tip glinting under the soft lamp in Cliff's office. Outside, the courthouse square hummed with ordinary life, cars rolling past, children spilling from a school bus. But here, in this paneled room lined with books, the air was still. Final. Cliff slid the final document toward her. "This is the last revision, Fran," he said quietly. "It closes every door, and it leaves nothing uncertain." Fran read each line as if they were the last pages of a story she'd carried her whole life. Stephanie Whitlow, permanently disinherited. No claims, no appeals. Joel's access tied to nothing but his silence. And at the heart of it, Marley's trust, extended not only through college but beyond, written to include a full creative grant should she choose her own path. Her eyes caught on the final paragraph. A legacy note, written in her own hand, transcribed into the legal file. Words that would outlive her voice. "My name is not yours to erase. My silence is not your inheritance. My love belongs to the one who remembered me." Fran picked up the pen and signed. The scratch of ink against parchment was steady, certain, like the sound of a gavel falling. When she set the pen down, her shoulders felt lighter, as though the weight of her family's betrayal had finally been measured, recorded, and locked away where it could no longer touch her. Cliff sealed the pages into a heavy envelope, pressed a red wax seal across the flap, and slid it into a safe box lined with steel. He closed it with a decisive click. "This box is yours," he said, handing it across the desk. "But I'd like to keep it in my vault, for protection. No one breaks in, not without breaking the law." Fran laid her palm flat against the cool metal. "Then let it live there," she said. "Safer with you than under my bed." Cliff nodded. He slipped the key into his pocket, the faintest smile lifting his mouth. "It's done." Later that week, in her backyard, Fran carried a young magnolia sapling out into the sunlight. Marley followed, her small hands gripping a spade. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the smell of damp soil and brine from the harbor. "Right here," Fran said, pointing to a patch of ground by the fence line. "Magnolias remember. Their roots go deep, and their blossoms outlast most storms." Together they dug. Fran's hands were slower now, her back aching with each bend, but Marley knelt beside her, tossing clumps of earth aside with a determination far larger than her frame. When the hole was ready, they lowered the sapling into place, its leaves glossy and green, its branches trembling slightly in the breeze. Fran pressed the soil around it, her fingers firm, grounding it. Marley copied her motions, then sat back on her heels, dirt streaking her face. "Do you think it'll grow big?" Marley asked. Fran smiled, brushing soil from her palms. "Bigger than both of us. Long after we're gone, it'll still be here, telling its story." Marley reached for Fran's hand, squeezing tight. "Like your journal." "Like the truth," Fran said. They stood together, looking at the tree swaying gently. A fresh beginning, planted in earth that had seen too much silence. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and coffee. Fran washed her hands at the sink, glancing out the window one last time at the magnolia. Its small form stood proud against the fading light. She felt calm, almost at peace, until headlights swept slowly across her yard, lingering too long on the tree, then sliding across the porch. A car idled at the curb, engine low, steady, watching. Marley appeared at her elbow, eyes wide. "Grandma, who is that?" Fran rested her hand on the girl's shoulder, her voice soft but firm. "It doesn't matter who they are. What matters is, they can't touch what we've planted." She spoke the words with conviction, but her gaze stayed on the car outside, its silhouette unmoving in the dusk. The magnolia had taken to the soil as if it had been waiting for that very patch of earth. Its small leaves glistened in the sun, trembling against the breeze, casting speckled shadows across the yard, where Marley now sat with her easel. She dipped her brush in blue, dragging it across the canvas, the bristles whispering against linen. Fran watched from her rocker, the creak of its slow rhythm matching her own breathing. Marley hummed softly, half tune, half thought, her concentration fierce in the way only the young can carry it. Each stroke of paint felt like an answer to the chaos of the months past, proof that something delicate could grow where anger had once rooted itself. Fran's gaze lingered on her granddaughter, but her thoughts drifted to a sealed envelope resting in Cliff's vault. Her story, in her own words, preserved for the day she was no longer here to tell it. That day arrived quietly, not with death, but with choice. Olivia, Cliff's young assistant, opened the envelope weeks later when instructed, placing it carefully on Marley's desk like something sacred. The girl unfolded the papers, her hands trembling, and began to read her grandmother's words. "This is my story, written so you will never doubt who I was or what I stood for. Don't ever let anyone touch your voice the way she touched my collar. If they try, remember, truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand." Marley pressed the papers to her chest, her tears falling freely, not of grief, but of recognition. She whispered into the quiet, "I won't forget. Not ever." Meanwhile, Cliff sat in his office, clicking the send button on the final probate notice. It was a single, simple line of law. No contest allowed. With it, every door Joel and Stephanie might try to pry open slammed shut forever. He leaned back, exhaling, Knowing Fran had not only secured her estate, but rewritten the meaning of legacy itself. That evening, Fran hosted a dinner in her Charleston home, not the fraught, brittle kind that once ended with slammed doors and bruised silences, but one filled with neighbors, with Inez telling stories louder than the cicadas outside, and Harriet laughing until her shoulders shook. The table was crowded with sweet tea, casseroles, roast chicken, red rice, and gardenias clipped from Fran's yard in a vase at the center. Marley sat beside her grandmother, paint still under her fingernails, smiling more freely than Fran had ever seen. She leaned into her side and whispered, "This feels like family." Fran squeezed her hand beneath the tablecloth, her throat too tight to answer. The night carried on with the easy music of forks against plates, chairs scraping, voices overlapping. No whispers, no threats, no one telling her to sit still and stay silent. On the wall above the mantel hung her plaque, Charleston Elder Advocacy Award. The gold lettering caught the lamplight, gleaming against the backdrop of photographs, Robert with his arm around her, a younger Joel on his first day of school, and now Marley's latest painting framed beside them. Fran rose from the table for a moment, standing before the wall. She touched the award lightly, her hand trembling not from age, but from the weight of finally being seen. Respected, remembered, rewritten. The chatter behind her swelled, warm and real. Fran turned back, her eyes sweeping the table, their faces lit by soft light, their laughter unforced, their presence steady. And in that quiet pause, she spoke her truth aloud, not to them, but to herself. At the table, she whispered, her voice firm as stone. My daughter-in-law grabbed my collar and said, "Keep quiet or get out," so I quietly cut her name from my will. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if the air itself understood it had just witnessed the closing of a book. At the table, my daughter-in-law grabbed my collar and said, "Keep quiet or get out," so I quietly cut her name from my will.